As the days of Hanukkah has just passed, it's my pleasure and my honor to devote a few words to a dear father, a dear husband, a wonderful Jewish leader, and for me, a dear friend, and during my years in Halifax, definitely a dear partner, Victor Fineberg, Zechrono Livracha, who was taken from us during the holiday of Hanukkah. I'll be honest with you that if it was just memories that I'm about to share, then I wouldn't have recorded it as I'm doing now, because it's private. But what I'm about to say is not private, because what I believe Victor did in his life, whether he knew it or not, was to take a Mishnah and implement every single word of it. He took one Mishnah in Masechet Avot and said, this is the Mishnah that will dictate the way I rule and lead my life. And it wasn't just that he led his life that way, but because of the way he led his life, we all benefited. From leadership to laymen, we all benefited from the way he implemented every single word in that Mishnah. The Mishnah in Tractate Avot, chapter 1, subdivision or Mishnah 15 states, and I quote, Asei Toratcha Keva, make your Torah permanent, Emor me'at ve'aseh harbe. Say little, but do a lot. What's the connection between these two statements? It seems like two wonderful pieces of advice. Number one, Asei Toratcha Keva, make sure Torah learning and implementing the Torah, namely doing the mitzvot, is permanent, not just sporadic. And number two, do more than you speak. I'd like to suggest that one is dependent on the other. If you're someone that just likes to talk and write long emails and go ahead and come up with great ideas, but you have no idea, no any intention to do anything that you said, then the Torah won't be keva. There won't be a permanent synagogue with a permanent minyan, with a permanent mikveh and a permanent eruv and kosher food and whatever else a Jew needs in order to implement that Torah as a permanent staple in his life. But if indeed you do more than you speak, then everything I said will be there. If you do more than you speak, all the Jewish services will be available on a permanent level. And there was no one I knew that implemented this message more than Victor Fineberg, Zechrono Livracha. During my years in Halifax at the Beth Israel Synagogue, if there's anything that I achieved, anything that I was able to go ahead and do, it was only because of a contract that I had with Victor. Whether the contract was a verbal contract, though we never shook hands on it, or a written one, though there is no written contract between us, but rather it just worked. He told me, you come up with ideas to make this synagogue viable, to make it full of activity, and I'll make sure it's done. He wasn't the only one that made sure it was done, but I can promise you that without him, not even half of what I achieved would have come into the world. Not even half of what I thought up, as he told me to do, would actually be seen and will actually be tangibly felt by anyone. If I said we need a Shabbos dinner, he found the way to do it. He found the way to bring in the kosher food. He found the way to serve it. And he found a way to take that idea out of an email and bring it down to the social hall. If I came up with idea regarding how to celebrate Jewish holidays, he was the one that not only supported it, but found ways to do it. I recall very vividly the first year that I was in Halifax and the holiday of Shavuos came. And I was told by everyone around me that is the most dead holiday, not just in Halifax, but in every community. There isn't the Seder on the one hand or the Sukkah on the other. There isn't the shofar blowing. It's not a full synagogue as Yom Kippur. If you get a minyan, you'll be lucky. And I really felt, and I still feel today, that it's impossible that a community can go through a Jewish holiday without making an event, without making it tangibly felt by the community in some way or another. And I told this to Victor, and he told me, the board won't go for it so easily, but I'll make sure it's done. And we took a chance. a financial chance, and many other chances for reputation and whatnot to make an event. And thank God, with hard work, over 100 people joined, and it became a staple to celebrate Shavuos in the synagogue. Without Victor, that wouldn't have ever happened. Namely, a holiday would have gone by, and instead of it being permanent, as the Mishnah said, it would have been sporadic. If you happen to have guests and they happen to want to go to synagogue, maybe there'd be a minyan. I believe that because of Victor, it became a staple. Not just an idea in an email, not just an idea that was thrown out at a board meeting, a staple. Shavuos is celebrated, and celebrated well in the synagogue. But it wasn't just that Victor knew when I said, let's make a Shabbos dinner, where to order the food from, or who's going to set up the tables, or who's going to lock up, or who's going to clean up. It wasn't just that he was someone that as a doer and not as a talker, he knew how to get things done. The truth is, he was a master talker. He was a wonderful schmoozer. He was fun to hang out with. He was fun to host at Shabbos dinners. He was wonderful to sit with at a table, and if I ever got stuck at an office, I'd love to sit with him. But that's exactly why I think that he was such a novelty. Because he knew how to speak, and because he was a schmoozer and people enjoyed his company, the fact that he said it's more important for me to do than to speak is in and of itself an amazing value. And that value is one that I think next generations have to hear. Someone that knows how to speak and schmooze and write emails and whatnot, and still says it's more important to do than to speak. And because of that, Aseh Toratcha Keva, during my years, where he was such a part and parcel of the leadership of that synagogue, the synagogue was a place where ideas were not just thrown around, they were implemented. And it was because of him who mobilized others to say, let's not leave this on a piece of paper, let's get this done. But the Mishnah goes on and says, Have makabel kol adam besever panim yafot. You should always greet each person with a smile. I can't begin to tell you how many people used to come into the synagogue, be it on a small Friday night, in the small chapel, or Shabbos morning in the bigger synagogue, where Victor was there with his blue and white tallis in the morning, or sitting in his regular place on a Friday night, and ultimately greeting each person, knowing how to speak to each person, not waiting for them to come up to him as the president, as the leader, as the local, but rather, I'm the local person, I should go ahead and greet them. And therefore, I don't think it's a surprise that many of the interpreters to that Mishnah say that we learn this message of doing more than speaking from our great ancestor Abraham, who, as we know, was a master hoster, someone that knew the secret of hospitality more than anyone else, someone that achnasat orchim, greeting guests, is more associated with than any of the biblical personalities. He was the one that was able to make a conversation with a very religious Jew or a very secular Jew. He was the one that not only greeted people, but was able to foresee what they needed even before they asked for it. I recall that once in one of his businesses, which was not kosher, he noticed over the corner of his eye that there was a business meeting, and one of the people there was an observant Jew, obviously not eating any of the non-kosher food, but just ordering a drink. Didn't ask, didn't provoke. He went up to that person, took him aside and said, listen, I'm going to go into the kitchen. I'm going to take salmon, which can be eaten even without the scales, according to many poskim. I am going to put a lemon and squeeze it on the salmon, which I'm going to cut with a disposable knife. I'm going to double wrap it after putting in salt or pepper or something like that, all kosher, and putting it in the oven double wrapped. Is that okay for you? Who else do you know would go up to someone and provoke that person to eat? Who do you know that not only implemented what was spoken about, but even before you say anything, he goes ahead and takes care of it for you. As we say on fast days, before they call out, I'm already answering them. As they're still speaking, I'm already listening to them and thinking, how do I get this done? I don't know how many people in your lives you were able to meet that were master talkers but did more than they spoke. Were wonderful people who greeted each person with a smile and was a good schmoozer, and yet understood that the schmooze is not the end all, but rather greeting each person nicely is a means to taking care of their needs. You don't visit a person that's sick just to say, I'm here. You go to visit that person to see if they need you to fluff their pillows, if they need medicine, to take care of their needs and daven for them. Which leads me to the last and final point I wanted to make in his honor. He was someone that never, I mean never, looked at this Mishnah or any other Mishnah and said, it's archaic, it's old, it's not relevant anymore, let's move on. He looked back at his father, Elliot Zechrona Levracha, that I had the privilege to know, his grandfather Zechrona Levracha, who passed away before I came to Halifax, and said, if they came to shul every day, then so will I. Not that Victor understood every part of davening. Far from it. Not that Victor really identified with Mincha, with Ma'ariv. I'm not sure he did. But he continued with the glee of tradition of old, connecting to generations and generations of Jews in his own family that were part and parcel of the daily minyan. 6 out of the 7 nights of the week, you can count him in, with very, very, very few exceptions. When we tallied the number of people for minyan, it was obviously myself, the people that were saying Kaddish, and Victor. Therefore, I don't think it's by chance that I found a Mishnah that literally speaks about this person word for word, letter for letter. It's a person that would look at this Mishnah and say, that's interesting. It was a person that would look at a Mishnah and say, well, if it's in there, and Jews for generations have learned it, that it must have value even in the year 2003 or 2022 on the brink of 2023. Never, despite all the technological advances, did he look back at the past generations and say, they were old, I'm better off. I remember his wonderful stories about Cantor Lieberman. And believe me, as one that unfortunately broke many laptops, at the time Palm Pilots, I can definitely tell you that he was a person that didn't believe you just throw it out. He believed in fixing what you have to make it great. And therefore, he never ever left the synagogue. He kept on thinking, how do I make it better? Yes, he wasn't a president forever. But what's amazing about his life is that when I knew him in the early 2000s, he was the president. And then, almost 20 years later, he came back to it. He didn't say what was, I'm now in a new place in life, but rather, it's a privilege to be a president of an Orthodox synagogue. And I have no problem 20 years later, despite all the changes in my life, no longer have kids in Hebrew school and whatnot, I'm going to be a president again. The master doer, Victor Fineberg, Zechrono Levracha, is one that I personally will miss greatly. But I believe the Jewish world will miss him greatly unless we take his message to heart and ensure that his legacy of doing more than speaking will continue to be a man place and a main place in our lives for many generations to come. Because if it will, then the Torah indeed will be permanent and indeed will live in a better place where, because the Torah is permanent and because we do more than speaking. We will also greet each person with a smile, because we'll have a lot to smile about. May his memory be intertwined with that of the living, that we continue his rich legacy of doing, of implementing, of taking ideas out of a piece of paper, an email, or a message, and making them tangibly felt by many for the benefit of the Jewish people wherever they might be. To his wonderful family, nothing that I said, I am sure, will comfort you on the loss of a husband and of a father. But just know that I, together with so many, miss him greatly, and promise that his legacy that he lived for so many years will hopefully continue by the many that he touched. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory always be a blessing and a source of inspiration for all those that got to know him.